Up front, this is meant to be an interactive, everyone takes part type session. Give you a little bit of how it's going to work. We've got a panel, a large panel. You see all these chairs here. Each of us will be putting forth a brief provocation, which I hope some of you disagree with. And then there'll be opportunities for everyone in the audience to make statements, to ask questions, disagree, and so on. We have one member of our panel who's in foreign parts. Nicholas is in South Africa. He's presenting through a video. So with no further ado, let's get on with this. Okay, so this one's called It's All Important, of course, but. Now, we all agree that digital preservation is a good thing. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't. So it's also probably given that in a room full of curation people, preservationists, if you presented a list of policies, features, characteristics, components, and problems relating to digital curation, the consensus will be that they're all important. And then someone would say, but. And this panel discussion is an exploration of that but. What is the most important aspect of digital preservation? So I'm going to get started with Nicholas. He's got a little video presentation. Rather than try and read all that small text, just to say that he is manager of digital library services. And so over to Nicholas and his video.
Hello, colleagues. So my contribution to this panel discussion is a provocation around decoloniality, or coloniality perhaps, and it's much discussed, I think, in theoretical sort of post-colonial circles in academia, but perhaps not so much in the practical day-to-day environment of archiving and specifically digital preservation. And it's quite simply the question whether archiving as we know it and digital preservation as we know it is in fact colonial. How do we approach the subject in a post-colonial environment? Do we need to do things differently? Do we need to think about things differently? Is digital preservation somehow tied up in colonial practices in ways that can or can't be undone? I look forward to the discussion.
Nicholas is online, so if questions are directed to him, hopefully you will pick them up on the screen. So, Donna, if I give you that,
yes.
the green button.
The green button, not the black button.
Not the black button.
Black button. Thank you. I'm Donna McCrosty, and I'm from the University of Melbourne in Australia, and my title is Deputy Director, Research and Collection Stewardship. So I have broad oversight for the digital preservation strategy at the university and a wonderful group doing the practical implementation. So my starting point is responding to change is better than following a plan. So just reflecting on my experience in the last 10 years, I believe establishing a digital preservation program is largely opportunistic and iterative. It's about finding the right intersection into conversations and, more importantly, bringing the right people together. Not focusing on digital preservation in itself, but more broadly around the ecosystem of digital material activity and functions that enable digital preservation. Having a plan or an institutional-wide strategy provides a framework for engagement, advocacy, and a robust foundations to enable decision-making about who and what to engage with when opportunities arise. It guides priorities and directions, and it's essential to enable an effective and useful response to opportunities and unexpected change, rather than a reactive response without broader strategic oversight. Pursuing opportunities that pop up in the broader ecosystem with the right people is what I think really makes the difference to progressing a better integrated digital preservation work. But there needs to be investment in cultivating those spaces to bring the right people together. For example, in our institution, we invest in cultivating communities of diverse stakeholders, all who need to be involved in keeping digital materials for the long term. It's no longer the usual suspects, the library, the archives, the records, the digital preservation practitioners. It's IT, it's decision makers at all levels. And it's also our current and our future users who are the right people that need to be at the table, that need to be involved in these conversations. It takes time, it takes energy, and importantly, the right people in itself to coordinate and cultivate. So for me, it's about building a community, bringing the right people together, adapting and responding with agility, seizing opportunities as they present.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kaylin Smith, and I'm from Cambridge University Libraries. The provocation I'm putting out there is that it's all about vision, or vision is kind of what I'm staking my 1-minute presentation on. So when I say vision, I mean what an institution is committing to when it comes to preserving their digital collection materials and how this will be carried out. And vision is really what I think, at least, what following work really pivots on or pivots around. And I think risk is created when digital preservation isn't clear within a digital preservation team, and especially the wider institution. We also know, too, that digital preservation is an ever-moving target. We're having to deal with formats and technologies that were created years and years ago, more contemporary formats and technologies and things still to come. We can't do everything by ourselves. We need to work with our colleagues and peers within the digital preservation community. So I think it also is important that we can explain to them what we're trying to do and how we can collaborate and how our colleagues within our own institutions can help advocate for digital preservation. So I think without this vision, again, implementation can't move forward. How do we answer questions such as, is funding required? What skills and experience are needed from our colleagues, from our team members? What's the scope of materials that need to be preserved over the long term? Without a vision, these and other crucial questions are left unanswered and result in a lack of direction. Thank you.
Okay, hi there. My name is George. I'm based here at the University of Strathclyde, and my provocation is whether scholarly repositories should really exist if they don't have some kind of viable digital preservation strategy in place. So actually, digital preservation has been something that scholarly repositories have evaded for quite some time, and many of you will remember that when scholarly repositories, and so I'm kind of referring to institutional repositories and subject repositories and so on, when they really started to emerge in the early 2000s, we were all flooding them full of PDF documents, and at that point PDF was still a proprietary format, and even then no one really gave a great deal of thought about the implications of these proprietary formats for scholarship. Fast forward now, we have many more repositories. We have mega repositories like Zenodo, and actually the question of digital preservation isn't something that's widely discussed or implemented on scholarly repositories. Repositories have become so critical to the global open research ecosystem, the data that they contribute to the scholarly graph, the way that repository content is used for new forms of scholarship like data and text mining, and yet, we're not really giving a great consideration to whether or not the objects that are being used for this scholarship are being preserved and maintained over time. And of course, the lack of maintenance of that content has a potential to undermine scholarship itself. If we cannot access content, then scholars can't verify findings, reproducibility may become difficult, replication may become even more difficult. So it's a really tricky process. So we have to be thinking more about persistence. And Martin Klein, who is in another session, is talking about robust links. So obviously persistence in identification and location, I think is more, it's gained more awareness in digital repositories, but the actual digital preservation side has not. And I guess, returning to the original provocation, should scholarly repositories exist if they don't have a DP policy or strategy in place? The answer is probably no, they shouldn't exist, because by existing, you are encouraging people to cite that content without any guarantee of it being accessible in future, and that ultimately kind of undermines scholarship itself. So I think that's my bit done. There we go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I am from University of the Arts London, made up of 6 art and design colleges, which might be more famous, so places like London College of Fashion and Central St Martin's. We have over 140 collections, again, most notably the Stanley Kubrick Film Archive. I'm here to say that I've chosen to focus on what is going to be important for us as a collecting institution. So that includes purchasing graduate artworks, and I have an example here to show the increasing complexity. So this is a screenshot from a virtual reality piece that was collected recently by Ed Phipps. We operate in a museum and gallery context, and that's relevant because there's really kind of growing discussion within those sectors around what we do and don't collect, thinking more maybe about things like whether we collect plastics. But we really should be thinking about both physical and digital collecting. And what's going to be important is balancing that desire to collect alongside our commitment to work in more environmentally sustainable practices, but also sustaining what we do, knowing that we have finite resources, as we know more about digital preservation, knowing what's going to be involved. And also, I think, where I am, understanding and being aware of staff readiness to engage with these increasingly complex digital objects in our care. This means that we are becoming more selective about what we collect. We're scrutinising this a lot more closely. We're also trying to engage more voices in that decision making. What's going to be important, therefore, is going to be our ability to demonstrate value and opportunity against issues such as the carbon imprint, the cost, the resources required, including being able to measure staff time. And this is where I think the kind of organisation that I'm based in is where we increasingly see digital preservation as a stage in a much bigger piece around digital curation. And what the future looks like is that we're going to be collecting less, but returning to the curation aspect is we're going to be seeking to tell new stories with those existing objects and collections that are already in our care.
Hi there, I'm Kirsty Lingstadt and I'm the University Librarian at the University of York. So, advocacy. For me, that is the be-all and end-all, that kind of generating support for a recommendation and a particular cause or policy in order to have action taken. And I think in any organisation, if there isn't an understanding of why something is important and a belief in and looking for support at all levels, then nothing further will happen. And again, I've seen increasingly in different institutions, be they memory institutions or universities, it's without that advocacy piece and that kind of general understanding and comprehension at all sorts of different levels, no action will be taken. No one will take up the cause of digital preservation, provide the resources, the money, or create the environment in which the right people, place and time can then take action, or even have something mentioned in the organisation's strategy and vision. So for me, the key thing is always having an advocate, a person, and it is that person who can tell the story as to why this activity is really critical to that kind of long-term piece taking place. And without that person who talks, challenges, raises awareness, talks some more, talks at senior level, at all sorts of different levels, operational level, without getting that buy-in, the organisation will never actually put digital preservation or long-term access to data or ensuring that our research data is accessible in the long term at the heart of what it does, or maybe not even at the heart, but as one of the key things it does. And getting to that piece is so, so important to all of us. So I think, therefore, my experience has sort of taught me, and I think even in memory institutions, we think preservation is important, but actually for memory institutions, they've dealt so long with physical objects and know exactly what to do that quite often the digital is scary and it's kind of daunting. So to have a person who can tell the story of why you should do this, to advocate, to pilot something, to try something, and then to show how it can succeed, what you can do with really small resources. And I think, again, we've seen that as this conference and again. So telling those stories, highlighting to the organisation, and really being a strong advocate for this activity leads to the activity to be able to be undertaken, to get the resources, the people, and the money that then takes it further forward. So again, in order to have this all happen, we need advocacy in our organisations, and again, storytelling as a really, really powerful advocacy tool that allows us to actually get to doing all of that.
I was told to press the button. All right, Paul actually asked us to rant provocatively about something we're passionate about. I'm very passionate about file formats, so I think the disclaimer, of course, would have to be that the views presented here are my own and not endorsed by my employer or anyone else. So what I'm saying is that we need to rethink our position on file formats and our processes on file formats. We have essentially been doing the same things for the past 15 years using the same tools. And the same things are file format identification, technical metadata extraction, format validation. Yes, they all have merits and values, but we think about things like format identification. Why are we not doing a better job at identifying a complex object? About metadata extraction, why have we not developed a good methodology to actually make use of that extracted metadata to tell us something about the objects that actually improves being able to store what's in them and not just looking at the shiny outside of the file format. For format validation, is that actually too lofty of a goal? Is it the right goal to validate against the standard? Should we be validating against something else? And who is validating the validators? Are we doing a good job there? And then some things I'm particularly allergic to are recommended file formats, normalization, so-called archive formats, and so forth. And the reason for that is that I think that if we prescribe file formats to our audiences, we're forcing them to do something that they might not be capable to do. On the other hand, if we normalize, we might make assumptions on data without having liaison with the data producer. So both stand at high risk of actually doing more damage and losing data than just at the sake of potentially improving or making work easier for us, but we're losing data. Is it better to call file format prescriptions recommendations, or is that like parents telling their kids, please don't do that, and then your kid goes around and does it anyways? And what does that look like in the digital preservation world? It might look like us saying, please give us a PDF-A, and what we're going to get is a PDF-A3 that has an attachment as a Word file that we didn't want, and possibly some URLs in them that link out to resources that the producer wasn't able to package the way that we wanted to pack it. So to summarize, we need to rethink our position on file formats. I think we're currently doing much more damage than actually doing help with the processes that we have.
I think that's my cue. So those who know me will not be surprised by this next slide. Money. Mickey was very passionate there about file formats. And again, those who know Mickey are not surprised about that either. Digital preservation is about mitigating risk. Mitigations cost money. And it's hard to justify spending that money without a firm grasp of the magnitude of the risks, the magnitude of the sums involved, the value of the data, and the value of what's at risk and the likelihood of loss. So understanding the value of data is hard. It always comes back to this value versus investment business case argument. Mandates drive policy, policy drives business cases. Ultimately, it comes down to the money, who pays, and how much. Some of my fellow panelists mentioned investment, mentioned finance. It's underlying everything. So yeah, it's all important. File formats are important. The vision is important. Throwing things away is important. The decolonizing, well, yeah, you know what I mean, of data is important. But ultimately, it comes down to the money. Someone's got to pay for it. And that is one thing that really irks me about discussions about preservation, because it is a good thing, it should be done, but no one ever actually follows through with the how it's going to be done or how it's going to be paid for. So that's my bit. I think money is the most important thing. At this point, we're about to start opening it up, and the panel will be arguing amongst themselves. I hope you'll be arguing and presenting thoughts and so on. Kirsty suggested right before we started, thank you, Kirsty, that we have a vote at the end of this as to which is the most important aspect of digital preservation. I see Patricia putting a thumb up there. So yeah, I hope I've got your vote, Patricia. But we might try and do that. It depends. It depends how it all goes. This is a totally untried format, a thought experiment, something, a bit of fun perhaps. So let's open it up. Anyone in the room, anyone outside the room want to make a statement? Anyone on the panel? First of all, Elizabeth's diving straight in. She's going to grab one of the microphones and go for it. There should be a microphone at each table. Go for it, Elizabeth.
Do I have to do anything?
No, you just speak.
Just speak, okay.
Just speak.
The level of confidence in that, sorry. So actually, returning to our first piece, so I'll explain myself so we give Nicholas a chance to type a response to anything, put him on the spot. But I do agree, fundamentally, that collecting its roots is in empire and colony. I absolutely agree. But what I don't agree is that it's not being discussed. Like those of us that operate in kind of the library and museum sectors, there's a lot of fantastic work taking place around kind of critical librarianship and, attempts to challenge kind of what we do. I think, however, bringing it back to this community is what I do see is that often people are treating digital as the answer to that. And I think that's where we have a responsibility to continue that interrogation and criticality of what we do. And the example that I share is I'm often in meetings where kind of senior managers throw around the term digital repatriation, and we haven't really interrogated what we even mean by that. We had a fantastic example from the Smithsonian shared yesterday about actual repatriation, but this kind of idea of digital repatriation, I think, again, we risk reinforcing those kind of power imbalances that, you can have a digital copy, but we don't trust you with the original. We're still the experts and we know best. And it, again, I think it is being discussed, but I think there is a real responsibility for the digital preservation community to ensure that the digital aspects of that are really interrogated, and digital, just because it's new, doesn't mean it's necessarily better.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that? Yeah, Mickey.
So I think I would like to differentiate that a little bit further. I think it's being discussed, but it depends on where on the world you're located and that it's being discussed. I think it's being discussed in the UK much more in depth than anywhere else in the world. But I think what we as a digital preservation community should do and could do is try to integrate mechanisms for that that allow to move that material out of our digital archives as well. For example, have a workflow on premise that describes events. What can an event do or look like to the accession material?
Mm-hmm. Ewan, have you got something online? Trying to make sense of it.
So we're going to try to make sense of it.
Do you want to grab a microphone?
My
your
microphone is on.
Yeah.
Fabi Bartisiotti from LSE, which may be London School of Economics, potentially. I would add that from the operational point of view, readiness with the resources it is available is the most important aspect. So perhaps readiness with the available resources is the most important aspect. I don't know if anybody in the panel has thoughts on that. If not, we can open it up to comments, more comments, questions. We've got one here, and the microphone. Oh,
Shemaiah's got
You've
the
got one
microphone, so Shemaiah first. Yeah.
But I'm going to take us
ahead.
back to where we were, so I'm not sure if you want to take that
Go for it.
point forward. So I'd like to reflect on what Elizabeth and Mickey said there, and also what Nicholas put up as a provocation, which is around our colonial constructs of the workplaces that we work in. And yes, there are parts of the world that are starting to address this. I've worked in Australia, I've worked in the UK. My feeling is that the conversation is beginning in Australia. I don't feel that it's happening here, but that's just my own personal experience. And so that idea of decolonising or indigenising, if not now, then when? I think for me, if I had to choose out of all these things, and yes, they are important, then to me, this is an equity and a justice issue, and we're a room full of white, privileged, for me, middle-aged, English as a first language. The people that need to be in this room aren't necessarily here, so thank you for bringing that up.
So we have a gentleman here, and then there.
should we go to Leif first?
Leif Pettersson from Sweden. I'm concerned about this, what information to collect, because that's a moving target. We know history, we know now, we don't know future. And there are movements or fashions that have different interests. That's a question that fascinates me. What do we collect and why? Another thing is that we search what we know exists. And that if we don't know it exists, we will not search it, and by that we will not use it. So for me, that's a challenge.
Indeed. I'm going to pounce on that one straight away. Twisting it slightly on its head, we can't keep everything. We do not have the resource, we do not have the money, we do not have the disk space. So I'm going to challenge my fellow panelists to think about how do we go about deciding what to keep. And I have no idea personally. I'm more of a techie, a geek, a persuader rather than a user of this stuff. So I'm not the designated community. So I'm going to pounce on Kirsty, I think, on that one.
I think I agree. It is a really challenging issue, and I think one we're really grappling with in all sorts of areas. And I think we have collecting policies that help guide us and kind of identify what we should be collecting, what we shouldn't be collecting. We try not to all collect the same thing. I think in the UK, we've certainly, within the sort of library sector, looked very hard and closely at our collections and tried to make sure we have less overlap, we understand better what we've got. And I think it's an ongoing process, and it's a process that ever continues as we refine and further refine. But I think it's also interesting when we start talking to the communities on whose behalf we're collecting, or when we look at research data. I was sort of recently talking to some researchers, and they said, yes, we have to keep this for 5 years because the funder says, but actually we just want you to press the delete button after that because this will have no value. We will be doing new research, we will have taken new material, we will have collected new things. We do not think this should be kept. But then you talked to others, and especially within the archives and collections team, and they were like, oh no, we should be keeping this because... So I think it's very much a dialogue which will help us to get to some answers. I think we will have to be brave and also accept we will not get it right. We will fail to collect things. We will lose things along the way. There will be disks and servers that get damaged, destroyed, where we just lose that content. But that has happened throughout history, and we live with those consequences. So I think it's something we need to actively engage with, think about, talk about decolonizing, try not to keep everything because we don't have the resource to, but live with it as well.
We did have a response from Nicholas Zimmer
Oh, great. Good.
for the colonization, and he just wanted to say thank you for the response from our person in the corner, and that he would share that with the colleagues at the University of Cape Town.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had some nodding over there. Donna, go for
I
it.
just want to come back to that collecting issue again, and it brings up the some of the comments from the keynote yesterday from the Smithsonian. Who really should be collecting, and where should these collections reside? Coming back to, there's a rap or a hip hop collection that sits in a out of context of the community and things like that. So some serious consultation and more thought about where is the most appropriate place for these collections to come together, to be meaningful, to be close to their community, to add context as well. I think there's a whole conversation around that.
And I think the question was kind of, what do we know? And again, that is bringing more people, so it's not just us making the decision. So I mentioned that where I am, we do purchase graduate artworks at the degree shows, and that historically has been based on tutor recommendations. But that brings so much kind of issue. It's not unproblematic. It's got bias built into that. So one of the things that we've done is change who makes those decisions and bring more people in. So now makers already represented in the collection, they now go around the degree shows and they make new recommendations. And we've opened up kind of the membership of the selection committee to include more kind of junior members of staff and have more of a discussion, so it doesn't come down to a small group who have to take on quite a lot of responsibility to know how do we reflect this emerging digital arts landscape. We're inviting more people, and we're trying that out. It's not, it's going to change again, and that's part of it, kind of trying things out and be willing to kind of experiment a bit more.
Go for it, Kayla.
If I could just ask you a question, Elizabeth. One of the terms that you used in your presentation, I think, was staff readiness. And if you could expand on that a bit more, because I'm sure others in the audience are keen to know what that means and how their staff can be ready as well.
Thank you. That very much comes from a conversation I had with Judy Wilcox, the head of the museum at Central St Martin's, where we were basically saying, we're not ready to collect digital art, but we are very much. And that's very much a conversation that we're having more broadly with the museum sector, and that we are absolutely not equipped or staffed to do this, but we're learning as we go. And I think I'm fortunate that being based in a learning environment, that there's acknowledgement that we will potentially get this wrong, but that's part of how we're going to work out what we need to do, that we will collect these challenging formats, and that's part of our learning journey. But that's, again, it comes back to that bringing the voices in and being quite open with those artists and makers that we're collecting from, so that they're part of that journey with us and that they understand what that might mean when it does enter the collection. But yeah, the staff readiness is the lack of staff readiness.
And I think if I can pick up on what you were saying, it's also about us being aware and recording, kind of that is a key part of the metadata. Why have we collected this? And if we have had that broader community engagement, that kind of recording of why was it collected at that particular point in time, because that is going to change, and that will help our understanding and help us decide what we need to keep when we look at it in 50 or 100 years' time. And again, also when we think about why do we leave the collection in the community, that context and understanding of context, if we don't somehow add that to our records, we will lose track and sight of it and then not have that understanding. So I think from what you were saying, Elizabeth, that's going to be a really important part of it.
I'd like to open it up slightly. I'm surprised that no one has raised from the floor the concept of carbon and emissions within digital preservation. I know some people, I'm looking at you, Barbara, I know some people on the floor have some strong thoughts about this, so perhaps you might want to expand on that.
I don't know whether I have strong ideas, but I would like to raise something that might be a little bit controversial, but that's why we're here, aren't we? Sometimes I think, is there small digital preservation and large digital preservation? Because if you speak about what do we collect, the organization where I worked for, the National Library of the Netherlands, there is a whole department deciding what we are collecting. That's not the preservation department. That's a totally different department. In the digital preservation, we made cost models, but in our organization, we had another department who was dealing with the cost of running the organization. So sometimes I wonder if we are not trying to do too much as digital preservationists. And if what Mickey said, why don't we have proper file format checks? Yeah, should be our focus. There are a lot of things that should be our focus, and we are doing. Sometimes I think we are running around, thinking about everything, trying to do everything, but sometimes losing the focus, what's expected from us. And maybe that's also the same with the carbon. Of course we should be worried about, of course we should be aware of our footprint. But there are others that could give us that kind of information. And then we can decide from a digital preservation point of view, what we could do less or more or whatever. But I don't think we need to take the burden of everything on our shoulders. That was my...
And then Neil after that.
This is mine?
Yes, you.
All right, Tricia Patterson, Harvard Library. I really like that you said that because it led right into what I was thinking about, and I wanted to expand on the advocacy concept that Kirsty brought up, and along with the provocation here. Perhaps this is a very impractical suggestion, but I'm hearing a lot of talk about collaboration inside of our institutions and advocacy within our institutions, and I feel like one of the ways towards relieving the burden from our profession is not bringing people in, but going out to people and focusing more on personal digital preservation to democratize the historical record and decolonize our collections and not focus so much on what we're trying to bring into our collections and controlling that, but really trying to empower people to steward their own collections so that if they ever do come to us, I don't know.
Yeah, there's an online question or statement that feeds directly into that, that says, remembering the Tamar Evangelista Dougherty keynote, it strikes me that the conversation about the cost of iPres attendance, in person or virtual, must be prioritized going forward. How can we discuss decolonization fulsomely when being able to be part of the conversation itself is a privilege?
Mickey wanted to come in?
I have one comment about the advocacy part. I do agree that that is a good way to go forward, to kind of go out and use multiplicators for that. And I think kind of combining, Kirsty, your argument, Paul, yours, and my own, if I would have to choose, as if I'm an institution hiring someone, and I would have to choose between hiring someone for digital preservation advocacy or for someone to deal with file formats, I would always hire someone to deal with file formats. And I think that as an institution or as an organization, such as iPres, if we look at iPres as an organization, we need to give the tech talk more room and give the, it might be considered derogative if I call it soft skill talk. It's not really a soft skill talk. All these issues are incredibly important, but I think we need to have very dedicated and focused conversations around the digital processes that we use. And currently, we're frankly leaving it up to the software vendors to implement workflows that we then use to gather information. Right? And is that how we want to move forward?
Neil, and then up the back there.
Hi, Neil Grindley from JISC. I wanted to sort of take it back to the conversation about are we thinking too much, trying to do too much. I was struck by a scenario that our colleague introduced earlier about what happens if a senior leadership in an organisation comes to us, you as archivists, librarians, and says, right, it's all costing too much. Right, let's think about 20, 30, 50% cut in your budget to storing these things. Right, go away and deal with it. And that might be because either the money or because carbon emissions. And so we might not have to, we might let the context in which we're working come to us with those kinds of bigger issues. But I think if I was to kind of sum up maybe a priority in one word, like that's been done already, say advocacy, I'm wondering about the idea of trust. Because I think we need trust from the content and data creators to entrust their materials with us. And we also need to put trust in each other, and we a lot of talk about collaboration. What we don't really want to do is proliferate models, curation models, hopefully not cost models either, but that's kind of difficult. And so, yeah, I think, we need to, I think just that notion of trust goes a long way in terms of having the content creators and data creators, should that sort of doomsday scenario come along and we have to take action, then it would be extremely helpful for the continuity of us, as a community working with the content creators if post that stage where we have to take hard decisions and maybe do some appraisal and review of data, that they trust us to actually get on and do that and then continue to work with us afterwards.
Okay. While the microphone's making its way up the back there, does anyone on the panel want to come back on that? Pensive thoughts?
Should we ask that?
Go for it, Elizabeth. Oh, go for it, George. Yep.
I might not come back on that, but I might pick a fight with you, Paul.
Yep, go for it.
If I may. You were encouraging me to be confrontational.
Yep.
So I was just going to dispute whether money is the most important aspect of digital preservation, because to me, it's money isn't the issue. I think
money isn't the issue.
In a way, it's always the issue, but it's not the principal issue. There is money available. So if I take my organisation as an example, there is untold wealth available within our directorate to fund all sorts of initiatives to do with cybersecurity, student record systems, and so on. The cost of investing properly in digital preservation is infinitesimal compared to the cost of some of these initiatives. And so really it comes down to the argument about advocacy, that really it's about raising awareness and breaking through this organisational inertia. I mean, within the context of the provocation I gave, within scholarly repositories, I could probably confidently say, I think, that 95% of scholarly repositories are not doing any digital preservation at all. And I don't believe that there isn't some resource available to support that kind of activity if it was properly advocated.
Okay. So up the back there?
As I read from Catania National Library, I was going to start with something else, but then I feel compelled to kind of contribute to what has been talked about, mentioned about money is probably not the most important aspect for some organizations. So I represent Catania National Library, and I think it's the newest national library that was established just 4 years ago in the Middle East, and there is considerable resources available, but it's about using that resources for the right reasons. And the point I'm trying to make is that it really comes down to advocacy and the understanding of the need for digital preservation, especially in that part of the world where there are other things at play. Buzzwords like cybersecurity, as you mentioned already, and having data centers, clouds. These often get the most priorities when it comes to allocating resources. So that's the first point. The reason I want to contribute to this conversation was about the digital repatriation and what Miki mentioned about, we should really be thinking about file format identifications, and also repositories shouldn't exist without digital preservation. Yes, I agree with all of that, but based on the experience of, my personal experience at Catania National Library, we have a digital repatriation program that's been running for the last 15 years, even before the library was established. And this is, and one of the first initiatives that we had was with, and it's still ongoing, with British Library. And this is one of our flagship sort of collections. When the conversation began, I think it was back in 2011, nobody talked about digital preservation, even though British Library was part of the conversation. It was more about getting the content that's relevant and pertinent to Qatar, digitizing it, and sort of adding it to collection. What could we have done at that time? There was, even though somebody like British Library, who's been involved in the conversation about digital preservation, was really digital preservation wasn't even a thought at that time. Only recently, I think it was about 2 years ago, we started thinking about digital preservation, and by that time we'd already accumulated nearly a petabyte of data. And now we have the massive task of actually, digitally preserving it. Sorry, just one more question. A point that I wanted to make is that, and it's related to inclusivity. And we saw Tamer's presentation about making the digital preservation inclusive and so on. But the way I see it, some of the examples that have been talked about, the use cases, the challenges, they're predominantly related to the West. There is a massive world out there. They've got information, they've got content that's worth preserving, but they don't know anything about digital preservation. Even if they heard of the term, they look at it, they think, that's exclusive to the West. They're the ones doing the work. I mean, we don't really have to worry about it, or maybe it doesn't apply to us. How do we get the message across? Is it the responsibility of the digital preservation communities in the West? Should we be, reaching out more? I think it comes partly down to the advocacy aspect of that. Should we broaden our horizon? Who should be taking the first initiative? Who should be taking the first step? Should we be waiting for the rest of the world to somehow reach out to us? Would it be too late by then? So I know it's a kind of fragmented thoughts, but I think these are worth discussing, and perhaps the panel could weigh in on them. Thank you.
We have quite a few questions also from the audience.
Okay.
I mean, from the
online
audience.
All right. I'm just going to counter that one briefly. Just countering your last point, who should be doing it? Well, who should be paying for it? It's not going to happen unless someone puts their hands in their pockets. And people here, I would say, wouldn't necessarily have the budget to do that. They may know someone who does, which possibly comes back to Kirsty's advocacy, says he grudgingly. But it's down to the money again. So what online stuff?
Yeah, so there's a couple, so I'm just going to
go for it.
Shoot them all out. Keith Pendergrass, we seem to be passing over what is the ultimate digital preservation risk, even more fundamental than money. We rely on the natural world to support all aspects of modern society, including digital preservation. With the real-time breakdown of the climate system that we are witnessing this year, at what point does the most important digital preservation action become determining how we can ensure the persistence of digitally preserved human knowledge through climate collapse? Going to keep going. Anonymous would like to know more about the PDF files, what types of problems were encountered that they could actually be opened but not archived. Is it mainly a PDFA noncompliance? So keep that in mind. And then Andrew Kelly asks, all the issues raised have been happening in GLAM for decades in regards to physical and paper collections. I feel that advocacy is the most important, having your organization see digital preservation as a core part of business rather than a competitor can help with all of these issues. Why do we see digital preservation as something that should be handled by a special unit or directorate rather than something that should be integrated into our business as usual? Lots of questions there.
I like that Patricia wants to come in, so after I just get hybrid, homogenous, cross-platform. Yeah, definitely. Everyone needs to be involved. We are too siloed. Everyone over there want to go for it, Donna?
Can I take that siloing question? At my institution, we're trying to reframe the conversation and a few words, digitisation. We're trying to get a different understanding of that word and take an end-to-end perspective. Digitisation is around prioritisation, it's around conservation, it's around metadata, it's about creating a digital surrogate, it's about discovery, it's about digital preservation. So looking at that end-to-end. So when we talk about it, we talk about all those things and we look about the cost implications, the resource implications, and the system implications for all of those things. It's a hard conversation, it's a long conversation, and we haven't landed it, but we're having a go.
So up the back there, and then Patricia.
Hi, everyone. Can I start off by emphasising that I'm speaking very much in a personal capacity, and nothing I say should be connected with any of the institutions with which I'm affiliated.
Could you mention what those are now and your name, please?
Yeah, it's Viv Cothey. My reaction to everything that's been said is that, of course, there's truth in some respect everywhere. But I find myself siding very much with Barbara's comments, and when I apply them to the argument for advocacy, my interpretation is that, yeah, of course we need advocacy, but advocacy about what? And it seems to me that the contribution that the digital preservation community can add the most value, that where we can do the best job is advocacy about the core requirements, the minimal preservation requirements, without which there is nothing. So, yes, all these comments that have been made about advocacy, about carbon, about file formats, yeah, great. But if we don't exist, and if we're not doing the minimal job, then we go nowhere. And that, I think, is where the focus should be. I'm obviously likely now to get shot down in flames, but we are trying to be, slightly controversial.
I think I would agree that advocacy around a minimum viable product, an MVP, is important. Anyone else want to comment on that, Caitlin?
Can I just clarify, the last question that was asked was about making digital preservation part of core business. Yeah, so that's something that I'm proud to say that we're doing at Cambridge University Libraries, and also taking that minimum viable product approach. I wonder if I can put my colleague Natalie on the spot here, who is actually leading on the creation of a deposit service right now, and also bringing our archivists together to learn more about digital archiving and improving their skills in that area. Can you pass the mic over to her? She has her hand up there.
Did you want to comment on that, Kirsty?
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, I think it's just, it's really been about starting small for us, I think, and just a lot of it, what Elizabeth said about readiness, that's really important, but there's also confidence, I think, among the archivists we're dealing with. They are experts and they've got such a lot of experience that they can bring to this, but there's a real barrier for them at the moment because they just feel like digital, tell me what I should do. And I think we want this to be a conversation, not a kind of, we're providing you with a tool which we think you should use. It's got to be part of a two-way dialogue, really. But that's where the MVP approach is going to be so valuable, because we're starting with something very basic. We can cut our teeth on it. We can take some collections in, kind of hoping nothing as complicated as Elizabeth has to deal with comes our way early on. But yeah, I think start small, do the basics, make sure you can take things in, and then build from there. I mean, it's a very inspiring talk.
Kirsty, and then Patricia, did you want to come in? Yeah. Okay, so could you get the microphone to Patricia while Kirsty talks?
So I would agree, it is very much advocacy around about that digital preservation activity, and I think that needs its own advocacy. I think, yes, we've got in institutions, we do a whole range of things, but if we don't advocate and tell the story of why digital preservation and that kind of minimal viable product for whatever, and that minimum viable product will look different in each institution as well, or each organisation, or each kind of community group. So it is very much being aware of that and talking about it. Also talking about it in language that that community and that group will understand, that they can connect to, and understand why they should also care about it and start talking about it to others and kind of really making the case for it. To me, that is a sort of really critical component that then allows us to get some money, to get someone in, to do the file formats and to do all the rest of the stuff. But it is that really basic understanding. And us, I think I'm picking up on what Amina Shah was talking about in our very first keynote, that kind of telling the story of why this is so important and using language that everyone can understand, because actually digital preservation isn't a well understood term in some communities. So I think that point of minimum viable product, bringing it back down to the basics and bringing it to the heart of what digital preservation is about, is the thing that I really think is important.
I say it's not understood at all in some communities. Patricia, if you'd like to come in, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing in digital preservation is understanding the organisation. and being able to tell the story about and connecting to the core mandate of that organisation so you get buy-in. I think saying digital preservation is a good thing just for the sake of it is not enough. So I'd just like to burst the bubble here and bring the example of the Plumpy Nut bar. Hands up if you know what the Plumpy Nut bar is. Yeah. The Plumpy Nut bar is a high nutrition bar that's given to children who are dying of malnutrition in refugee camps. I work for the High Commission for Refugees, and I was given this example when preparing the business case for digital preservation, saying, how can you give me as much value as a Plumpy Nut bar? Okay, and this was, we developed a business case, and we can talk about it later, but so understanding the organisation was critically important, and it's not vision, but it's mandate. When I was trying to come to this conference, I knew I didn't have the money to come. It was an assumption that I would come. We didn't have the money. So I paid myself. I had many people who couldn't come to this conference because they couldn't afford it. They're finding it hard to get digital preservation training. So I'm going to bring in a few things here. I think that I'm really happy with Mickey's idea of file formats, because that really falls into what we're doing and how we approach it. But yeah, money is ultimately, for me, the most important aspect of digital preservation. How we get it, it depends on advocacy and clear messaging and clear indication of what value we are bringing to the organisation in terms of protection of lives, people's lives, displaced people's lives, one of the most vulnerable people in our society. So ultimately, for me, people are the most important thing in digital preservation, because we're talking about people, right? We're not, and that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting point. Okay, I promise you a vote. I've written down 16 different things now. So I'm going to pick out a couple of them because they seem to be recurring themes. Advocacy seems to be a recurring theme. Money, because I'm abusing my privilege standing here at the top. People, trust, vision and policy, I'm going to roll into one. Okay, so all those who are in favour of, let's start with people. Hands up, it's easier, yeah, okay. And advocacy? Money? Oh. Trust? Okay. Vision and policy? I've no idea who won.
For those,
I think it was people, actually.
For those watching, can you kind of describe what you just saw in
I saw
5
people
seconds,
holding
and
up
then we will
hands. A few hands, not the overwhelming wave of support I was hoping for, but we saw a few hands, and I believe it was probably the people won the vote on that one, won the vote. So Patricia's very last minute entry into the what's most important. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Round of applause for our panel.